Welcome to the NPERS W4P, W4R, and W4N Tax Form Guide. In this video, we will be reviewing the W4P and the W4R Federal Tax Forms, as well as the W4N Nebraska State Tax Form. These three forms are used to determine the rate at which federal and state taxes are withheld from the various types of retirement distributions. Submitting all that apply to your retirement distributions is important, as failure to do so will result in taxes being withheld incorrectly. In this first part of the video, we will review the 2023 changes to the federal tax forms, W4P and W4R, and highlight the types of retirement distributions to which each of them applies. Then, we will take a look at how to fill out each of these two forms. In the second part of this video, we will review the Nebraska State Tax Form, W4N, who it applies to, and how to fill it out. In 2022, the IRS released two forms that effectively split the old W4P federal tax form in two. The revised form W4P is now to be used only for tax withholdings on periodic payments. The new form W4R is to be used for tax withholdings on non-periodic payments, eligible rollover distributions, and the 5-year designated period annuity option. The goal of this change is to provide for more accurate federal income tax withholding. Let's take a closer look at the types of payments covered by each of these two forms. In this context, the word payment refers to the taxable income you are receiving from your retirement account or accounts. As stated previously, Form W4P should be used to withhold federal income tax from periodic payments. The IRS defines periodic payments as payments made in installments at regular intervals, for example, annually, quarterly, or monthly, over a period of more than 1 year, for example, monthly pension or annuity payments, that are not eligible rollover distributions. Periodic payments may include substantially equal payments made at least once a year over the life of the employee and/or beneficiaries, or for 10 years or more. Common examples of periodic payments include payments received through a periodic pension, most annuity payments, profit sharing and stock bonus plan, or Individual Retirement Arrangement, or IRA. Now, for a walkthrough of the W4P for annuity payments. To begin, please note, your retirement income is taxable. If you wish to elect your federal income tax withholding rate or provide additional withholding data, complete the W4P to elect your federal income tax withholding designations. If no W4P is submitted, or if the form is submitted incorrectly, NPERS will simply withhold federal taxes at the IRS default rate of single with 0 allowances. You may adjust your federal withholding at any time by submitting a new W4P. If applicable, please review the instructions for the W4N if you wish to designate Nebraska state income tax or claim exemption. If you submit a W4P, you must complete Step 1 and Step 5 at a minimum. Complete Steps 2, 3, and/or 4 only if relevant to your personal situation. If you wish to have additional federal tax withheld each month on top of the rate that you've selected, enter that additional amount on line 4C. Now, let's take a look at Step 1. Start by entering your A. Name and address, B. Social Security number, and C. Anticipated tax filing status. Be sure to check only one of these options. Please note, the IRS instructions state that if you do not provide a Social Security number, NPERS cannot process this form, so please enter your Social Security number. Step 1C determines the standard deduction and tax rates used to compute your withholding. After completing Step 1, you may skip to Step 5 unless you wish to fill out any of the following optional steps. Optional Steps 2, 3, and 4. Step 2. You may wish to complete this step if you have income from a job, have more than one pension, or if you file jointly and your spouse works or has a pension. Examples of how to complete Step 2 can be found on page 2 of the W-4P form. Step 3. Claim dependents. You may claim credits for qualifying children and other dependents. In addition, you may be able to include other credits. Step 4. Refine your withholdings. If you wish to withhold tax on other future income that won't have tax withheld, you may report that income on line 4A. Common examples of this type of income include interest, taxable Social Security, and dividends. If you do not claim the standard deduction and want to reduce your withholding, you may report other deductions on line 4B. The deductions worksheet on page 3 of the W-4P may be used to calculate this number. And lastly, if you want additional federal tax withheld each month, enter that amount on line 4C. Please note, the IRS does not allow NPERS to correct the W-4P. If you enter any data in steps 2 through 4, please double-check your math and entries to ensure they are accurate. NPERS cannot correct this form on your behalf. Now that you have completed Step 1 and any of the optional steps you wish to complete Step 5 by signing and dating your W-4P. Please review the form for accuracy before submitting it to NPERS. Please return your completed W-4P with your completed W-4N, if applicable, along with any other required paperwork. Default IRS rates will be withheld for annuity requests submitted without a W-4P or W-4N. The IRS default rate is single with 0 allowances. Defaults will apply to any forms that are filled out incorrectly. Some final notes to keep in mind. W-4P is for federal income tax purposes. State taxation is determined using a W-4N, which will be discussed later in the video. You can designate an amount in addition to your standard deductions by specifying that on line 4C. However, you cannot designate a total flat amount to be deducted. The additional amount specified will be withheld from each payment. You can use this form to elect no federal income tax to be withheld from your annuity payments by writing "No Withholding" in the space below line 4C. You may change your withholding at any time by submitting a new W-4P. If you are drawing more than one benefit from NPERS, you will need to complete a form for each of those benefits separately, and if these forms are submitted together, you will need to denote which form is for which benefit, or your withholding may be inaccurate. If you are drawing more than one benefit from NPERS, you will need to complete a form for each of those benefits separately, and if these forms are submitted together, you will need to denote which form is for which benefit, or your withholding may be inaccurate. For state and county members only, if you choose the 5-year designated period annuity, Taxation is mandatorily withheld at 20% federal and 5% state. This annuity may also be subject to early withdrawal penalties. This 5-year designated period is considered a non-periodic payment. This will require submitting a W-4R for extra federal withholding and a W-4N for extra state withholding. We will be discussing non-periodic payments in more detail in the next section. Form W-4R should be used to withhold federal income tax from non-periodic payments or eligible rollover distributions. Pension or annuity payments that fall outside of the IRS definition of periodic are considered non-periodic payments. For example, the 5-year designated period annuity discussed at the end of the last section falls outside of the IRS definition of periodic due to the fact it is paid for a designated period of under 10 years and therefore has a mandatory withholding of 20% federal tax. Distributions from an IRA that are payable on demand are also considered non-periodic payments. So, regardless of what you are doing with the money in your retirement account, if those funds are eligible to be taken as a rollover, which our tax-qualified retirement accounts are, then even if you are going to take a lump sum distribution, not a rollover, the money is still considered subject to the IRS rules for eligible rollover distribution money, so we would withhold 20% federal tax. In the cases of non-periodic payments, we are required to withhold the mandatory amounts of 20% for federal taxation and 5% for state taxation, unless you submit a W-4N claiming exempt status from Nebraska state tax. You do not need to return a completed W-4R unless you wish to have more than 20% federal income tax withheld. You do not need to return a completed W-4N unless you wish to have more than 5% Nebraska state income tax withheld, or you wish to claim exemption from Nebraska state tax. You cannot elect to have less than 20% federal income tax withheld from your lump sum distribution, and unless you can claim exemption, you also cannot elect to have less than 5% Nebraska state income tax withheld. If you elect to roll over or transfer 100% of your account to another qualifying tax-deferred account, you do not need to return a completed W-4R or W-4N to NPERS, as taxes are not applicable. You do need to return a completed Rollover to Financial Institution, NPERS 3101 form. This form provides instructions to NPERS for your rollover check. Partial rollovers and multiple distribution types. If you are a school, judges, or patrol member electing an annuity, do not complete the W-4R form, as multiple distribution types are not allowed when electing an annuity under these plans. If you elect multiple distribution types, then the W-4R may be completed. This applies to lump sums, Roth IRA rollovers, pre-tax money is taxable when converting to a Roth, and for defined contribution plan and deferred compensation plan members only, the systematic withdrawal option, or SWO. You do not need to return a completed W-4R unless you wish to have more than 20% federal income tax withheld. If you submit a W-4R, you must fill out all of the lines of information that you see here at the top of the form. Let's take a look at Step 1. To begin, fill out Part 1A. Enter your first name and middle initial, and then your last name. Next, fill out Part 1B, your Social Security number. Keep in mind that the same IRS rules we covered in our walkthrough of Form W-4P also apply here. If you do not include your Social Security number, NPERS cannot process this form. Next, fill out your address. and then your city or town, state, and zip code. Next, let's go over the information on withholding rates presented in the next section of the form. For NPERS accounts, the default withholding rate for federal tax is always the same, 20%. This applies to non-periodic payments discussed in the first bullet point as well, because the money is coming out of an NPERS account. All funds held in an NPERS account are considered eligible to be taken as a rollover, and are therefore subject to the default withholding rate of 20% discussed in the second bullet point. Now, let's take a look at Step 2. This is the meat and potatoes of this form. Complete this line, and by extension this form, only if you want more than 20% federal income tax withheld from your payment. If you do wish to withhold federal income taxes at a rate higher than 20%, enter the total percentage you wish to have withheld on line 2. So, for example, if you wish to have an extra 5% withheld from your payment on top of the default 20% withholding rate, you would write the total on line 2 as 25%. Finally, complete the form by signing and dating the section below Step 2. Keep in mind, this form cannot be processed without the last 2 items being completed. Please review the form for accuracy before submitting it to NPERS. Type or types. If you wish to elect your Nebraska state income tax withholding rate, or provide additional withholding data, you would complete the W4N to elect your Nebraska state income tax withholding designations. If you wish to claim exemption from Nebraska state tax, you must submit a W4N. If no W4N is submitted, NPERS will simply withhold Nebraska state taxes at the IRS default rate of single with 0 allowances. You may adjust your state withholding at any time by submitting a new W4N. Annuities. If you are receiving more than one annuity benefit from NPERS, please specify which benefit the completed W4N applies to by writing a note in the top margin of the form. If you do not clearly designate which benefit or benefits to apply the W4N submitted, NPERS may not withhold accurately. Lump sum distributions. If you are a Nebraska resident and you elect to receive a lump sum payment, partial lump sum payment, or systematic withdrawal option, SWO, for state and county DC and DCP members only, NPERS is required to withhold 5% Nebraska state income tax on the taxable amount of your refund. You do not need to return a completed W4N unless you wish to have more than 5% Nebraska state income tax withheld, or to claim exemption from Nebraska state tax. You cannot elect to have less than 5% Nebraska state income tax withheld from your lump sum distribution unless you can claim exemption. If you are a non-resident of Nebraska, you may request to have Nebraska income tax withheld from your lump sum distribution. Rollovers. If you elect to roll over 100% of your account to another qualifying tax-deferred account, you do not need to return a W4N to NPERS. You do need to return a completed rollover to financial institution, NPERS 3101 form. This form provides instructions to NPERS for your rollover check. Now, let's walk through how to fill out Form W4N. If you submit a W4N, you must fill out all of the lines of information seen here at the top of the form. Start by filling out your first name and middle initial, last name, social security number, current mailing address, and your city, state, and zip code. If you are using Form W4N to claim exemption from Nebraska state tax, do not fill out the following filing status section or lines 1 and 2. Instead, skip directly to line 3 of the form. If you are using Form W4N to withhold additional Nebraska state taxes, begin by filling out your filing status in the section to the right. Check the box indicating whether you are filing as single, or if you are married and filing jointly, or filing as a qualified widower. Please note, if you are married but filing separately from your spouse, or if your spouse is a non-resident alien, check the single box. Anyone filing income tax returns with a head of household status should also check the single box. Next, you will fill out the total number of allowances you are claiming on line 1. To calculate this number, refer to Section 4 of this form. Section 4 contains the Personal Allowances worksheet. Read each item of this section carefully and enter the number that corresponds to you on the lines to the right. Once you have completed lines 4A through 4E, add the numbers on those lines together and enter the result on line 4F. This will be the total number of allowances you are claiming on line 1 of this form. Note that this number may be different from the number of exemptions you claim on your Nebraska income tax return. Return to line 1 and enter the number you calculated on line 4F. Ensure the number you entered on line 1 is correct. NPERS cannot correct this form on your behalf. Now we are ready to move on to line 2. Complete this line only if you want more than 5% Nebraska income tax withheld from your payment. If you are using the W4N to withhold additional Nebraska state taxes, move on to signing and dating the form after you have completed lines 1 and 2, and do not fill out line 3. If you are using the W4N to claim exemption from Nebraska state tax, do not fill out the filing status section or lines 1 and 2. Begin by reading all of line 3 carefully to confirm that you meet the conditions for exemption. If you can provide evidence that you meet both conditions, write exempt on line 3. You may then move on to signing and dating the form. Complete the W4N by signing and dating the section below lines 1 through 3. This section must be completed in order for NPERS to process the form, regardless of whether you are using it to withhold additional taxes or claim exemption. Please review the form for accuracy before submitting to NPERS. To summarize, if you are receiving retirement income in consistent installments or periodic payments, the W4P form should be used to make your tax withholding elections. If no withholding form is received, or your form is filled out incorrectly, then default rates will apply. If you are receiving retirement income in the form of non-periodic payments or an eligible rollover distribution, you may request more than the mandatory 20% federal tax by submitting a W4R, and more than 5% Nebraska state tax by submitting a W4N. If you are eligible to claim exemption from Nebraska state tax, you must submit a W4N to claim that exempt status. Keep in mind that if you have multiple sources of retirement income, you will need to fill out a separate tax withholding form for each source. Members should consult a tax preparer or IRS Publication 15T for guidance on completing the forms we discussed today. NPERS staff are not trained to assess your personal tax situation. If you have any further questions, please contact Member Services at 1-800-245-5712. Thank you for watching the NPERS W4P, W4R, and W4N tax form guide.